InFi, Episode 4.
Welcome to InFi, the future of finance, hosted by American economist and author Dr. Robert Murphy. Each week, tune in for dynamic discussions with business pioneers about emerging trends in finance, life insurance, asset management, technology, and more. Now, let's talk the future of finance.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the InFi podcast. Today, I am joined by Carol Roth. It was a very fun conversation. I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. Let me just read to you from her official biography so you understand where Carol's coming from. Carol Roth is a recovering investment banker, entrepreneur, TV pundit and host, speaker, economic, business, and financial commentator, content developer, and two-time New York Times bestselling author. Her books include The Entrepreneur Equation, The War on Small Business, and You Will Own Nothing. In this upcoming interview, folks, Carol and I explicitly discussed those last two. Carol's worked in a variety of capacities across industries, including currently as an outsourced chief customer officer, as a director on public and private company boards, and as a strategic advisor in C-level consigliere. Carol connects the dots on financial, business, and economic issues for novice and pro audiences alike. She's also the creator of the FutureFile legacy planning system and software, and we talk about that halfway through the coming interview. Carol advocates for small business, small government, and big hair. Coming from a blue-collar family, Carol has worked hard to seize the American dream and is fighting to preserve that opportunity for all Americans. So as you can see from that description, Carol's views fit in well with mine, perhaps except for the big hair part. So joking aside, this is a very fun, informative conversation. Here we are, my discussion with Carol Roth. Carol, welcome to the InFi podcast.
It is such a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I am looking forward to this one. I look forward to all the guests, of course, folks, but this one in particular, because it was one of our agents here at Infineo who said he was a big fan and said, you got to get her on the podcast. And believe it or not, Carol, I said, I'll try, but she looks like she's too big for us. And no, apparently we meet the cuts.
We were able, my fantastic assistant was able to find this tiny little pocket and slot you guys right in. So glad we were able to make that work.
You're waiting for lunch to come or something, and you says, let's go ahead and give these guys a break. So joking aside, I was intrigued. I think maybe a good starting point is on your bio at your website, you say that you're a recovering, and that's in quotation marks, investment banker. So can you explain what that means?
I can try. So I always say that when you are a deal maker, you never really get out of deal making. It's sort of a way of life. So even though it's not the core of what I do from day to day, I always seem to get dragged into something, and I'm still working with different private equity firms on evaluating transactions and giving people advice. So I joke that I'm in recovery as an investment banker, kind of a 12-step program, and I'm perpetually stuck at step 11. But my background is doing billions of dollars in transactions, everything from private capital to public markets, IPOs, and then on the M&A front, buy side, sell side, leverage buyouts, and the like. And so lots of experience there that kind of formed the foundation of, I guess, my knowledge base, and also gave me the financial flexibility to do all of the weird things that I do now.
Right. And like you said, like your background, Wharton School and so forth. So you know the standard stuff that financial planners and people on Wall Street.
I sure hope so.
And so, but I like to stress that because I have a mainstream economics degree too, so that I think that gives me some credibility than when I explain what I think the limitations are. Like, here's what the Fed says they're doing, but that's crazy. At least, I can plausibly argue that I understand where thhere coming from, and here's what I think the shortcomings are.
Exactly.
So your latest book is a bestseller on many different lists. It's called You Will Own Nothing. So again, I'm sure some of our audience is already going to know what that's a reference to, but for those poor souls who don't know what the threat is and what that's a reference to, can you elaborate on that and what's in the book?
Yeah, I'm not sure if maybe ignorance is bliss in this particular case, is some of the things that we're talking about, but it is important to empower yourself with knowledge. So I came across the phrase, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, on probably Twitter maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it was kind of this meme that was rolling around, and it was attributed to the World Economic Forum, which I happen to know as a group that is littered with the business and political elite. You may hear about them getting together in Davos, Switzerland every year to, kiss each other's behinds and tell them how smart they are and eat some caviar and whatnot. And so when I first saw this, as I often do on social media, I just kind of figured it was taken out of context, right? Because there's no way that the people who understand wealth creation would be advocating for the end of private property, let alone by 2030. And as somebody with my background who has been advocating for wealth creation opportunities for everybody for more than a quarter of a century, the one thing I know above everything else is that wealth comes from ownership. You have to own assets in particular that can either be stores of value or hopefully appreciate in value. And that's how people create wealth. So this idea that, the number one prediction from the World Economic Forum's 8 predictions for 2030 is you'll own nothing and you'll be happy seemed really crazy to me. And then you started to part and parcel it. And, the first part is you'll own nothing. Very clear that it was not will own nothing, that the people who are making the prediction clearly were not including themselves in that prediction, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then the second part is the you'll be happy part. And so if you think about throughout history, the people who have not owned property, that haven't had their property rights protected, who haven't had that opportunity to participate in society as an owner, have not only been unfree, but have been unhappy. Many of them have starved to death until lost their lives. So it's interesting to me that it seems like there's sort of this psyop going on to try to get people to buy into the convenience. And wouldn't it be great to not have to worry about anything? Because the people who ostensibly want you to own nothing,
they wouldn't buy into it. They would just rent it, right?
Exactly. Very well played. Right. Exactly. They would rent into the idea so that they don't have to force it upon you. Very well done.
Well, yeah. So again, folks, as Carol's saying there, I had the exact same experience, Carol, that, there's lots of, Alex Jones things and whatever. And, surprisingly, a lot of some of the stuff he said did come true. But when I saw the you will own nothing and be happy, and they were attributing it to either they said WEF or sometimes they said Klaus Schwab in particular. And like you said, I thought either that's got to be a paraphrase of something that's some gobbledygook, whatever. And no, it was literally their own video that had it. They took it down, I believe, after the
No, it's still on there. It's still on their X, formerly known as Twitter stream. You can see the video.
Okay, all right, yeah,
because I did a screenshot from it yesterday. So as of yesterday,
okay, great.
It was still up there. And by the way, people only get to the first prediction. The second prediction is that the U.S. will no longer be the world's leading superpower, which is also incredibly frightening. But people are so up in arms over the first one, they never really make it to the other 7, which are equally as bad.
Yes, yeah. So for people at home who still think, come on, what they mean, folks, is their vision is people living in this tiny little dwelling, jam-packed like sardines into an apartment unit because they've got their virtual reality goggles. It is because it conserves, to reduce their footprint on Mother Earth. And that you don't need to own cars. There can just be, flying cars that are sort of like Uber. And so it's like this world, this future where a few billionaires own everything and robots do a lot of the work and all that stuff. And everybody just rents flows of services because their real income is so high because of automation and whatnot. So that's also too, Kara, I don't know if you get into this in your book, where a lot of these leading billionaires now are in favor of UBI, universal basic income, because, all these people aren't going to have. So it really is this vision where a lot of humanity is just going to be cattle with VRs strapped on, plugged in and into the metaverse, and that's why they don't care so much about the fact that they're living in a 10 by 10 apartment and don't own it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really almost the scene. I don't know if you ever read or saw the movie of Ready Player One, but that's, sort of the vision of it. Like you said, is, everybody's kind of in this fake reality that they've constructed to create their own happiness because the world around them has become so bleak. And if you think about the incredible progress and prosperity that we have made in a very short period of time because of the protection of property rights, because of technologies that allowed people to continue to trade with each other, this vision is very much a step backwards. It's almost like a new dark ages. and a very frightening proclamation from people who really have benefited from that and seen other people benefiting. It's a very different vision than, say, like a Henry Ford, who wanted to dominate his domain, but also wanted to pay his workers enough to make sure that they had the prosperity to be able to buy the cars that he was producing. This is a very different take. And they use a lot of fear and catastrophizing and scare tactics. But one of the reasons, Bob, that I really think this is all going on is because of the shifting of the global financial order. And I think that most people don't realize that, the US has only been in this position for about 80 years. And before us, it was the British, and before the British, it was the Dutch. And so this is something that happens on a regular basis. And we're seeing the rhyme in terms of the US debt loads and the deficits they're running, the potential weakening of the military. The US is standing on the global stage, and some of the decisions that are being made. And so I think that these wealthy people, the people who are connected, who are students of history and have this power and wealth, they see that the order is changing. And so if you see that's changing, you have two choices. You can sit back and just hope and pray that it works out for you, or you can proactively try to control the outcome. And I really think that second part, which is very much just human nature, is what's happening. And it really takes a lot of the conspiracy theory elements out of it because, by the way, President Biden has talked about this, in a speech in front of the Business Roundtable, March 21st of 2022. That's, you can find it either on YouTube or on the White House's website.
Yeah, again, with this stuff, I think it sounds like you and I have similar takes on this and how we're trying to communicate it to a broader audience that, like, hey, I know this sounds crazy, but they're like the World Economic Forum, I forget the exact title, but it was like Forum for Establishing Standards in Global Governance or something like that, where they're almost literally, when you read the blurb, trying to establish a one world government. And they have government officials from around the world coming in, and they almost have like seminars about this is how you do blah, blah, blah in your countries. And because look at this model over here and look at, and they're all converging. So they're not literally handing over sovereignty at these conferences, but they are all copying this model. And I'm sure you've seen, Carol, too, Klaus Schwab bragging about how the graduates of his young leadership program have penetrated, and that was the verb he used, penetrated the cabinets of governments around the world. I mean, that's not just, hey, we're putting out a blueprint here and people are, persuaded voluntarily by the benefits of it and they go and follow it like it's a diet program. Like he said that our people are penetrating cabinets around the world.
Yes, and let's just underscore this, because part of what I did in You Will Own Nothing is I sourced everything. This has more than 600 sources in there. So a lot of it's mainstream media, a lot of it's from the horse's mouth. Again, you can find this clip on YouTube. It was Klaus Schwab speaking at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and that is what he said. Then we penetrate the cabinets. It came straight out of his mouth. And again, I'm always thinking about, as somebody who's in the media, who's somebody who's taken out of context from time to time, like, was there another context? Like, there's no other context when you talk about we raise these leaders and then we penetrate the cabinets. I can't, like, I'm good at thinking about other scenarios. I don't know about you, Bob. Like, is there any other scenario that penetrating the cabinets could possibly mean?
Well, and he says that in English too, right? You know what I mean? Because like one thing could be if he was saying it in German, or he also was fluent in French, and maybe the subtitle was a little off, or something. But no, he's openly saying it. And like you say, when you see the before and the after the clip and how they're all jocular, like that is, it means what it sounds like. He's not, it's not something else. And in his mind, I try to get in the minds of these people. I think you're right. I think one thing is, because if you're at that level of wealth and like, your family from a young age, you've been just jet setting around the world and going, like, they don't have any allegiance to a particular country. Like, I think they view that as sort of some backward, silly thing from the 1800s where people cared about what country they were from. And this is a global community and and if it's more efficient to do it our way, because there are a lot of smart people involved. Klaus Schwab, I think, has 2 PhDs, like in economics and engineering. He's just a smart guy. So I can see why they would think, look at how the world is run. This is kind of silly. There's a lot of needless suffering. And if people just let us take over, it would be a lot better for everybody.
Yeah, it's nice that you're giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Making him Darth Vader, basically.
I just think he's a communist who's been trying to push communism by wrapping it up in a bow in a different way. And he's, by the way, been doing this since 1971. As part of my research, I went back to the origins of the WEF. It started as the European Management Forum, and it coincided in 1971 with the publishing of Klaus Schwab's book, where he talks about this idea of stakeholder capitalism, which is a weasel word that he's, by the way, a very persistent man. He's been doing this for more than 50 years. And it's a very clever on his side, but nefarious phrasing. So getting back to the concept of ownership, which I think your audience will really understand, when you are an owner of something, you have skin in the game. You have taken some level of risk and you would put some of yourself into something in order to have that benefit. So if you own, for example, stock in a company, you've got that because you have worked hard and you have your blood, sweat, and tears, and you've gotten some options or some equity, or you've made income elsewhere and you've risked that capital in order to take a stake in a company and, hope that it works out for you. So you have that risk. And that's what a shareholder is. And in my mind, that's an actual stakeholder. They have an actual stake in what's going on. This nonsense word of stakeholder is, I'm somebody who doesn't take any risk. I have no real input, no skin in the game that I've invested, but I still want to influence the outcome and I still want to benefit from it. And that is sort of the communist way. It's the people at the top, want everyone else to do the work and for them not to benefit. And, by proxy, the people at the top benefit. So when they keep talking about all of these crazy concepts that fall around being a stakeholder, particularly something like ESG, which I imagine is coming up a lot in your world, this is what's at the core of it. And this is not a new endeavor. It may have a new packaging, but he's been pushing this concept since 1971.
Yeah, exactly. And he was, when I did a deep dive on that stuff too, like he was like taken under Henry Kissinger's wing way back in the day. And, so he's definitely very interventionist and like a global crusader for various causes that I think a lot of our audience, and certainly it sounds like where you're coming from, would be things anathema to us.
And I think it's also bears saying that not everybody involved is like sitting around a table with Klaus Schwab, like, an evil cabal with Dr. Evil at the middle of it. I think there are a lot of people that derive other benefits or at least feel like it gives them some cover to be associated, don't really understand what's going on, don't realize that they're being the useful idiots that are carrying back some of the ideas. I don't think that everybody who happens to be affiliated with this organization in some way, going to Davos or whatever, is a bad person or even has a clue as to what's happening. But unfortunately, they are being used as conduits to push this information back and these ideas back in ways that are very damaging, even though they may not be able to see that damage that's being caused.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol, for making that clarification, because you're right. Sometimes I think it does come off like I'm postulating that there's this network of 30,000 people who are all like, and that's not it. And certainly, too, like a lot of people, too, that are genuinely worried about climate change and things like I can understand, like, oh, look at these people are doing something about it and they have the scientists involved and that. What's interesting, too, Carol, is you were talking about the whole stakeholder. And do you agree? I think they use that term stakeholder as a foil to shareholder. Like they're saying, oh, no, it's not just the shareholders. There are others, people like labor and
they're conflating the issues. And I do think employees are actual stakeholders. I do think customers are actual stakeholders. I don't think random climate justice people are stakeholders. So, when you're a business, you have to understand who's actually has that vested interest, that risk. And I mean, that's your whole business, right? Is assessing risk. You get compensated for taking on a risk. These people have no risk. And that is the differentiation, but they're trying to conflate and confuse the two in order to use these companies, to really bully these companies to push their agendas, Bob, in a way that gets around traditional legislative processes. And that is incredibly nefarious and deliberate.
Yeah. And also, too, I don't believe them because, like, I unfortunately, I don't really have the statistics in my hand, but a couple of years ago, I then and looked at the attendees at these events and whatever. And even though they may make it sound like, oh, we have equal representation from indigenous peoples and labor unions and this, No, most of the people at this thing were high-level executives from banks and oil companies and media. You know what I mean? Like, it was, even though technically they were making it look like we're hearing from everybody, it was the people that fly to Davos or whatever. It's not somebody,
It's
from a
you'll
traditional
own
thing in Alaska.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, not will own nothing. And that's the other thing too, is a lot of times that, they'll tell us, oh, we're in this climate emergency. And nobody is acting like they're in a climate emergency. They're buying up waterfront property. They're flying on their private planes. They're
Yeah.
eating the meat that they're trying to eliminate. So from my perspective, if you want to at least sell me or try to make me believe in this emergency, you can at least play along, right? Like, you can at least pretend for a few minutes. And the fact that they're not even willing to pretend, I think, tells you everything that you need to know.
Yes, yes. Can we talk about another book that you had, The War on Small Business?
Sure.
Okay, because that, again, a fascinating topic, I'm sure is going to be resonate with our viewers. So what sorts of things, like, well, gee, war on small business? What do you mean, Carol?
So the War on Small Business came out of a request from my publisher very early into COVID, saying, we think this is going to be a historic economic time and we want somebody to chronicle it. And like a complete idiot, I'm like, oh, that sounds fun, not realizing, how long this would go on and the
Mhm.
permutations and all the things that would be happening. So, so I decided to write what ended up was like 3.5 books, and
Mhm.
went through multiple titles, including The Looting of America and so on and so forth. And, ended up with The War on Small Business. And it was really about the government picking winners and losers, not based on data science or anything else, but good old central planning, political clout and connections. We ended up living through the most historic transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street of all time, enabled by central banks and governments. And, really the pattern of what happened, because I knew that it was going to be erased or people were going to misremember it. And so I really wanted to follow it, along. So the
Mhm.
first part of the book was really that chronicling of what happened. The second part was a lot about how we got here, and really the central banks and the government coming together and distorting markets and creating this scenario that really favored that wealthy and well-connected group and centralized power. And for those of us who are looking for freedom and independence and decentralization, the small businesses, the average people, all of that stood for freedom and really, stood against the centralization. That's the sort of the power balance, how that has gotten disrupted and distorted, and the implications for that. And then, some solutions, of course, on how we
Mhm.
could potentially, if we had the fortitude, reverse that back. So I think, through my 3 books, what others have identified, and I would agree, is sort of the common thread, is rooting for the underdog, as it
Mhm.
may seem. But it really isn't so much rooting for the underdog as it is just rooting for the equal opportunity for everyone. Obviously, not everyone's going to get the same outcome, and we don't want to try to push that. That's this equity idea, and it's insane. But we want everyone to have the same equal playing field, and we don't want a handful of people picking winners and losers or tilting the playing field to favor one group versus another, which always seems to come at the benefit of the wealthy and well-connected, and not the little guy. So it's just ensuring that we have those rights that are protected, and that freedom that goes along with the traditional concepts of free markets.
When you are talking about them picking winners and losers, like in the initial stages of the COVID lockdown, do you mean things like what's a quote essential business, and that some of those rulings were kind
Yeah.
of arbitrary, and so you
I
wonder,
mean, they were
gee, yeah,
very arbitrary. I mean, you would have, so they shut down a third of the economy in the United States. Almost all of that was small business. And it was a scenario where you could get your dog groomed and their nails done at PetSmart, but you couldn't get your hair done and your nails groomed at
Mhm.
the small business that was, a few feet away. By the way, the weed dispensaries that had been illegal, a few months or a few years beforehand, and the alcohol stores were all open. And one of the things that this really begot was this continuation of this. If you had shut down the grocery stores, if you had shut down Amazon and they couldn't make deliveries, if you hadn't propped up the stock market like the Fed did, this would have been over in less than
Right.
2 weeks, probably. You wouldn't have made the 15 days, because everyone would have been, can't live like this. The big
Right.
companies would have said this is enough. But we weren't all in this together. Like the mantra said, the big guys got to benefit in multiple ways directly because their competitors were closed down and those dollars were flowing. And then from the support of the easy money in the market that inflated their values and gave them access to more cheap capital to be able to compete in an unfair way. So that's sort of the most obvious. And there's certainly many,
Mhm.
many examples of this.
Yeah, I remember too that some people were pointing out like they didn't let you go to church, but they kept the liquor stores open. And it's so I can understand like these people got to they need to have the liquor flowing, but other
Yeah.
people might have really wanted to be going to church at that point in time. So
Yeah, you should be able to pray equally to the liquor bottle or in church. They shouldn't be picking a winner or a loser on that
Mhm.
front.
Okay, can we switch gears? I know also that you have your legacy and wishes system. Can you maybe tell
Yes.
our listeners like with the backstory? I know because I know you had a personal thing that prompted you to realize the importance of that and why you are taking this so seriously.
Yeah, no, this is something that, I'd love to continue to have the discussion on, especially with your agents, because I think it's a valuable tool for their clients and also a really good loss leader in terms of selling the need for all different kinds of insurance. But basically, the product is called FutureFile, and it is a legacy and wishes planning system. And the shortest explanation is that it is basically a easy roadmap that helps you gather all of your important wishes and information and then creates a second roadmap for your loved ones. So if there's an aging issue, an emergency, or somebody passes away, that your loved ones know exactly what to do and they have access to all the important wishes and information. And this is very, very personal. It's a mission-based endeavor that came out of my own experience. I've unfortunately suffered lots of loss, including my mom at the day after her 51st birthday and my stepmom at age 55. And even having been through this, we just kind of assumed my dad would be around forever.
Mhm.
And he kept giving my sister and I things, his insurance, who his lawyer was, information on his social media, all these different kinds of things. And he kept saying, put it in the file, put in the file. And we're like, oh, okay, dad, that's fine. And so we just had this very big file and never really thought anything of it, stuck it in an accessible place, but just figured we, wouldn't have to use it for a very long time. And in 2013, my sister called me and said that my dad had been in a freak accident and to grab the file and meet her at the hospital. And so, the first thing that it did was it told us what medications he had been taking and important things that the doctors needed to know to try to save him. And unfortunately, they weren't able to. And
Mhm.
he was on life support, but brain dead.
Mhm.
And they said, do you want to pull the plug? Well, fortunately, as part of this process, 6 months earlier, we had gone through this exact scenario.
Yeah.
And my father first said, you decide. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. I'm not
Right.
making that decision. What do you want to do? And then he said, well, keep me alive forever. And I said, Dad, is that like really a realistic? Is that what you really want? And he's like, no. So his specific instructions were to talk to two different doctors. And if they had the same conclusion, then to go ahead and to,
Mhm.
pull the
Mhm.
plug. And that's what we did. And so the very first thing having this file did was give us the peace of mind, because if I had to carry that burden around for the rest of my life, did I make the right decision? Should I have gotten another opinion? Is this what he would have wanted? That would have destroyed the rest of my life. So that
Right.
made this invaluable. But on top of it, end of life costs are staggeringly expensive. And so we saved more than $10,000 by going through, what he actually wanted and what wasn't necessary. And then for me, that the other key point was hundreds of hours of time trying to
Right.
figure out all the different accounts, who were the advisors, were the beneficiary forms signed correctly, the key to the safe deposit box, like all these kinds of things, who he wanted where, who he didn't want where. And so we're like, this is the hugest gift. And as we talked about it with other people, our friends and family members were saying, I need this, I want this. So we went and we productized it. And it's very inexpensive. It's $99.99. We have two form factors. We have an actual kit that has two workbooks and a filing folder if you're an analog kind of person, or if you
Mhm.
prefer to type everything out. We have a Windows-based software. We don't have Mac yet, but I'm assuming that will be coming down the line. And it's been a gift hearing from families about the things that we have been able to help them through in their biggest time of need.
Well, yeah, that's great. Yeah, and as you acknowledge that, yeah, obviously Infineo here, we're big on life insurance, and that's an asset. Just seeing the statistics about how many adult Americans don't have life insurance, it's
Right.
it's understandable too that you're taking your kids to soccer, you got bills to pay, electricity is more important right now, but this looming thing that when it happens, yeah, a lot of prep,
Well,
even a little
and that's one
preparation
of
will come a lot.
that's one of the things that we've done that's been very helpful is a lot of time people don't want to have the life insurance discussion, but they do want to organize their stuff. And so
Hmm.
us walking them into, do you have life insurance? And here's why you might need it and whatnot. And then, kind of pushing it over to the experts because we don't do the wills, we don't do the trusts, we don't do the
Hmm.
life insurance. We let the experts set their domain. We just point everyone in that direction and then help them have a place to gather it and communicate it to their loved ones. So it really does become very symbiotic because you, as an agent, may not be able to get someone to have that conversation just from the get go. But if
Right.
they're having a family meeting and they're walking through getting everything in order,
Hmm.
then that comes up naturally. And so it
Right.
really does become, as I said, this leader into that discussion.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think some people just don't even think about like how much the funeral expenses are, and see what I mean. And it's really so.
It's staggering. It's staggering. I saw a statistic that the end of life costs were like the third biggest cost that a family has in their life behind a house and a car.
Huh. Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, so thank you for doing that. That sounds like it's extremely valuable for the families you're helping. I'm looking at the clock here. I know you got a hard deadline here, but I did want to ask you. Your bio also says that you have improv experience with Second City.
Yes.
So can you tell us about that? Like that's probably even more interesting than Klaus Schwab.
He does sometimes seem like a character out of Saturday Night
Right,
Live, but
right.
unfortunately, he's very real. So I've done a lot in the TV domain over the last 14 years, in addition to being sort of a talking head on various TV programs and now in the podcast world. I've also been a judge for Mark Burnett, who you guys might know from Shark Tank and The Voice.
Hmm.
He had a tech competition show called America's Greatest Makers, which was on TBS here in the United States. So I was one of the permanent judges there. And I filmed a bunch of pilots and done a bunch of things. So along the way, somebody had suggested to me that, hey, you're really funny and this and that, and you might want to try improv training just to take your skills up a little bit. And so since I was in Chicago, and Second City is obviously the preeminent place
Hmm.
for improv. I know that Toronto, I know your colleague Rachel's in Toronto. They have a Second City there as well. But I said, yeah, I'm going to do improv training. But here's my thing is I cannot work at the pace of the slowest person in the class. I can't go to these group lessons. I want to work with the pros. And so I worked with them doing private training. So I went with their actual troop members. One of
Hmm.
my trainees she was on the Cash Cab Chicago game show. She was the driver for that. And these fantastic directors. And so I did private training with them so that I could work with the pro players and not just the people who are starting out. And I think it's been very helpful in terms of the kinds of things that I do in my collection of weird experiences that I do on a regular basis.
So I mean, is it the kind of thing where, as people would probably imagine, like they give you some kind of scenario, like whose line is it anyway, like that kind of thing, and
It very much is. So
you're
they
picking up your
teach you some
dry
core
cleaning and they lost your shirt. What do you do?
They teach you core principles. The big principle around improv is something you may have heard of called yes and. So instead of somebody saying something and then you shooting it down and trying to go somewhere else, you
Uh-huh.
acknowledge them. You say yes, and then you try to build on it, even if you're taking it in a different direction. But you kind of say, "This is what's happening," and so it becomes how do
Yeah.
you support and build up your partners and your colleagues instead of competing with them or just being off in your own world. So that becomes the foundational principle. And then, yes, we get into the kind of weird scenarios. And it's been a very long time, so I don't remember. But, okay, you're all a bunch of people on a boat and you're doing that, go. And then, they say
Mhm.
something and you kind of just continue with it. And the funny thing is, when I was in high school, I was on the speech team. I was a little bit of a nerd, still am. And we had this tournament of champions. So if you had placed first in your category, I did something called special occasion speaking and I think something else. And you had come in first, then you could go to this tournament. And our team had certain categories where they didn't have anyone who had come in first, but if you were in the tournament, you could go into that slot. So they didn't have anyone for improvisational duet acting. Nobody had placed in that. And so they said, well, hey, do you and this guy want to try it? And we're like, okay. And we went in, and we're talking about all the people who placed first at all the tournament. And we had never done it before. And we actually ended up placing second in the tournament champions.
Oh, great.
So I think there's always been something in me that's had sort of the quickness and the ability to take a scenario and find the humorous points from it. So there is sort of like, it's not like it just kind of came out of nowhere. There are these elements of things that happened all the way back in high school that I can kind of connect back, which is kind of wild.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I had a similar thing. I was in the speech and debate team, and I think it was in college as well. And yeah, I was at an event for that, and then they had a slot for, I think they called it extemporaneous speaking or something.
Yeah, that one's
and
hard.
Like,
that's a hard category.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, they would give you a topic, and like you could take in a bunch of magazines. This is before the internet. Well, the internet probably existed, but it wasn't
right.
big.
Yeah,
and you prepare, and I came out and did. So yeah, and that I don't remember. I think I did well, but I didn't take the first slot. Anyway, yeah, a similar thing where I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Isn't that interesting, right? So now you're hosting a podcast. These things that like we do back in our childhood or in school that we don't think are going to have any relevance, and you end up pulling that skill forward, not realizing, oh, this was what I wanted to do, or I was going to use this in the future. So it's fun to kind of go back and make those connections.
Yeah, because I know for a lot of people, like public speaking, like they would rather, have spiders crawling on them or something. And for me, I was like, no, I would take the public speaking over the spiders. But okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know we got to wrap up here. So thank you so much, Carol. This has been a fascinating discussion. For people who want to see more of your work and your video clips and maybe some of the improv, where should they go?
So I'm very active on X, which is formerly known as Twitter, at Carol JS Roth. That's my handle sort of across social media. So if you're Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever, you can usually find me. My website, if you want to reach out to me, is carolroth.com. And if you're interested in collaborating on FutureFile, that's futurefile.com if you want to check it out. But you can reach out to the carolroth.com team as well.
Okay, great. Thanks. Folks, our guest this week has been Carol Roth, and thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
This concludes another episode of InFi, The Future of Finance, with Dr. Robert Murphy. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the host and for previous episodes, visit InFi, thefutureoffinance.io. Thanks for listening.